The first child vanished some time after the harvest, when the leaves had begun curling in on themselves and the mountain air thinned into something cold and faintly metallic. No one remembered her name at first, not even the teacher. That's what the record says. Her attendance line was simply crossed out, not in ink, but carved through the paper itself. According to a sealed Department of Education audit recovered in 1991 by a legal intern scanning old misfiled documents, 22 students were quietly removed from the Hollow Vale Missionary School roll books during the winter term of 1963. There were no parent notes, no medical absences, no transfer paperwork, just names scratched out. Some erased so aggressively the paper tore. The school's weekly attendance logs for October show something stranger. Beneath the names of those students, where teachers sometimes wrote brief behavioral notes, talkative, absent-minded. Very quiet today was a phrase that appears next to 9 of them. Began humming again. This was not followed up on. Not then. A memo dated December 3, 1963, signed by then State Superintendent Kenneth Wilby, includes a sentence that to this day no official has explained. Children unaccounted for. No inquiry advised. Refer all questions to Diocesan Liaison J.E. Halbrook. J.E. Halbrook does not appear in any subsequent employment records, nor in the state clergy database. But his name, that exact configuration, appears in a 1938 deposition regarding a school fire in Laurel Ridge, and again in a 1971 case about unauthorized baptisms in South Carolina. The handwriting is identical. Hollow Vale no longer exists. As a town, the land it occupied has been reclaimed by black walnut groves and heavy vines. The only structure left standing is the skeletal frame of the church next door, a place once called St. Elisha's by the creek. Though no creek can be found now, the school was burned in 1975 under circumstances still labeled undetermined origin. State fire marshals noted that the flames stopped at the chapel wall, as though arrested. No accelerants were detected. No remains were found, but the bell, the same one that summoned the children each morning, was found 10 yards from the ruins, clean, intact, and ringing faintly when touched. In the months after the fire, efforts to reconstruct records for Hollow Vale Missionary School began, but every attempt led to inexplicable gaps. Property deeds showed the land under the school had not been owned by the diocese, but by a defunct coal company that folded in 1911. Building permits listed the school as erected in 1948, but in 1936, aerial photo from a nearby mining survey clearly shows the same building already standing. Even the teacher employment logs are suspicious. 5 out of the 7 staff members who worked at Hollow Vale during that winter term had no prior teaching certifications. 3 had no social security numbers on file. 1 was later listed as deceased, but had signed a marriage license in a different state 10 years after the school fire, and then there were the children. Only 2 of the 22 missing. Students had relatives living within walking distance of the school. Both families insisted the children had transferred to another church-run program in Indiana when pressed for details by reporters in the 1980s. Neither family could name the new school. One mother, May Ellen Godfrey, left behind a diary entry that has since become part of local legend. It was as though he'd faded in slow motion. Still a dent in the mattress, still muddy shoes by the door. But the smell was gone. No child smells like nothing. He left, but not the way we understand it. Her son, Isaac Godfrey, was 8 years old. His name was never entered into the National Missing Children's Registry. In fact, most of the 22 never had official birth certificates at all. Just baptismal ledgers kept in the back of St. Elisha's Chapel. Only a handful of those. Books survived the fire. In one of them, dated 1962, each child's name was followed by a symbol, a small hand-drawn bell, but 4 of those symbols were different. Not bells, but closed eyes. In 1993, local historian Clara Whitfield obtained what appeared to be a lesson plan used during Hollowvale's final semester. It had been tucked into the back of a hymn book found in a thrift store 5 counties over. The curriculum appeared ordinary until the final page, labeled Silence Practice. Beneath it was a list of 22 names. Each line ended with a phrase. In Latin, Cantare ad lucem, dormire ad pacem, sing to the light, sleep to the peace. No public school would have taught this, and certainly not to first and second graders. But this wasn't a public school. Hollow Vale was operated under the Diocesan Extended Learning Initiative, a short-lived religious education program active only from 1959 to 1964. The initiative was shut down after 3 schools under its jurisdiction were found to have falsified enrollment and disciplinary records. In all 3 cases, children were unaccounted for. In all 3, no lawsuits were filed. No media coverage reached state level, and in all 3, the name Halbrook appeared. The Department of Education audit recovered in 1991, the one that confirmed the 22 disappearances, had been misfiled in a box labeled Archived Transportation Grants, minus 1,975. It included photos of the school's final roll books. In one photo, where the pages have been violently scored through, you can still make out one child's handwriting beside their name. It says, "Do I get to sing again tomorrow?" No one ever answered. The deeper horror is not in the fire or the disappearance. It's in the silence around it. In the fact that this school, this land, this bell, this ledger, existed with just enough official acknowledgement to grant it power, but never enough accountability to expose what it was really doing, and how 22 children were recorded. Only in fragments, a note in a hymnal, a scratched desk, a fading photograph, and then simply unwritten, as if they had been loaned to this world, and then returned. One final detail. In a maintenance report filed after the ruins of the school were cleared in 1976, a contractor noted finding a small brass key near what would have been the front office. Attached to it was a tag that read, "Dorm room, choir, pit." No dormitories were ever listed on the building plans, and no choir pit appears in any architectural layout. But in 1987, when a documentary team was granted access to what remained of the basement, they found a hatch bolted shut beneath the floorboards. They were never allowed to open it. The diocese rescinded permission the same day. The hatch is still there. The key is still in county evidence storage. The tag has since oxidized beyond legibility. To this day, no birds land near the chapel's ruined steeple. Even in spring, even when the air is warm and the leaves return. Locals say it's because the wind still carries the sound of children humming a song no one remembers teaching, a song that ends the moment you try to record it. If you tried to find Hollow Vale on a map today, you'd be wasting your time. The name was scrubbed from road signs in 1983, following a state-funded reclassification project that consolidated unincorporated Appalachian towns under Broader Township. Names. Hollow Vale became, officially, Laurel Creek Annex B. No one called it that, though. No one called it anything at all. because by then, there was no one left to speak for it. It wasn't always that way. Back in the 1930s, Hollowvale sat on a modest coal route between Stanton and Breathitt County. It was never large, never prosperous, but it had a railway spur, a company store, and a congregation. At its peak, roughly 70 families lived there. Most worked the seams along the Black Hollow Ridge, sending canisters of bituminous coal down to rail lines below, but the town didn't grow. It withered slowly, like a plant kept in shade. The mines closed in 1949, just after a cave-in that killed 11 men, none of whom were ever recovered. Official reports said the ground was too unstable for retrieval, and the shaft was sealed. A granite plaque with the names of the dead was erected just off Main Street. That plaque was later removed when the town church, St. Elisha's, declared the land cursed and no longer sacred. According to locals, it was buried beneath the chapel's foundation. No formal documentation supports this claim. By the time Hollowvale Missionary School was established in 1952, the population had already begun to vanish. Census data shows a dramatic decline: 141 residents in 1950, only 59 in 1960. But it's not just the number that matters, it's the omissions. Entire families disappeared from record mid-decade, not by death or relocation, but by silence. The Haslers, once listed as property owners and Sunday school donors, simply stopped appearing. The Eubanks, who had 3 children in the local district school, left no forwarding address, no transfer documents, no proba filings in county tax ledgers from 1962, 17 properties in Hollow Vale are listed as abandoned. Spiritual claim pending. That designation appears nowhere else in Kentucky real estate law. Aerial photos from 1958 show Hollow Vale already shrinking into itself. The buildings lean, the fields choke with rot. But there is one detail that researchers keep returning to: the footbridge, a narrow wooden footbridge connected the school to the church across the road. Records indicate it was never part of the original construction plans and was built by the school staff in 1956. There is no architectural file, no building permit, and no official material receipt, but it appears unmistakably in every photograph after that year: a black line over shallow creek bed, always in shadow. A surveyor's notebook from 1974 included a simple sketch of the area before demolition. Next to the footbridge, written in pencil, are 3 words: doesn't cast reflection. The land around Hollowvale has always behaved strangely. Farmers reported that crops planted within 2 miles of the school would not root beyond 2 inches. Soil pH tests from 1965 showed no abnormality. But a follow-up study in 1979, conducted by a private university lab, found inorganic subsoil movement inconsistent with known geological patterns. In simpler terms, the earth shifted without reason. There were local sayings, folklore passed down like warning labels. Children were told never to whistle after sunset, or the bell in the chapel would ring back. Pregnant women avoided the church grounds in their 3rd trimester. One midwife, Lena Bosley, swore that any child born after October will never take to their own name. No one ever proved what she meant by that. The post office closed in 1968. The town store boarded up a year later. What remained were hollow houses with curtains still drawn, dirt paths that turned back on themselves, and a telephone exchange that, according to Bell South records, continued receiving phantom signals until 1977, 14 years after the last home was disconnected. In one transmission, recorded and archived as anomaly number 33KY, a voice can be faintly heard repeating, "Line not complete, line not complete." The choir is not yet silent. But perhaps the most chilling element of Hollow Vale's geography is its erasure. In 1990, a topographical reassessment of Breathitt County failed to include Hollow Vale on its updated contour maps. A follow-up FOIA request by local historians revealed that the area had been labeled as non-essential for navigational purposes, and yet the roads still exist. The clearing where the school once stood still appears on satellite imaging, though it often registers as blurred or under cloud cover. Multiple drone attempts to photograph the site have failed, citing signal interference. One photographer, Levi Anders, recounted his experience in 2007. Every picture came back blank, not just blurry, white, like overexposed snow, but the ground was dry, silent, and when I walked the site, I felt like my name didn't belong to me. There are things a map cannot show. There are towns that fail to exist, not because they are gone, but because someone or something decided it was better if we forgot. The infrastructure of Hollow Vale still haunts Kentucky's record-keeping. Utility ledgers for the region show electricity consumption continuing until 1971, but the last family left in 69. Who or what was using that power? Even now, local wildlife avoids the perimeter. Hunters report deer skirting the old road. No birds nest in the trees that sprouted over the school's ruins. Game cameras malfunction. Compass readings shift. We spoke to Eldon McCaskey, a 92-year-old former land surveyor who visited Hollow Vale 3 times during his career. His last trip was in 1985. He described the town as hollowed from beneath. The ground feels taut, like skin stretched too tight over something else. You can feel it when you step, like something's under there, waiting. When asked if he believed the town's erasure was natural, McCaskey said something we haven't been able to forget. They didn't bury it. They just told us to stop remembering it. That's not the same thing. There's a saying in that part of Kentucky, one that didn't come from books or sermons or schoolhouses, just from people who stayed quiet long enough to know the difference. If you can't find it on a map, you're probably already there. That's Hollow Vale. It never had a welcome sign. It never had an exit, just children who went in, and names that came out scratched. If you search the 1960 Clay County Census for the name Briar, you'll find only 3 entries. Nathaniel, age 43, listed as a carpenter. Evelyn, his wife, a homemaker. And Ellie, their daughter, marked student, age 9. That is the last official trace of any Briar in Kentucky. No forwarding address, no death notices, no marriage or college records. Just that single appearance. And then, absence, by 1965. The Briar residence, a small clapboard house on the eastern side of Hollow Vale, was condemned and sealed. Inside, furniture remained untouched. A child's shoes by the door. A school coat hung neatly on a hook. Dishes still drying in the rack. But no living soul. County auction records show the house was never resold. The land deed was inexplicably labeled "Do Not Reissue," awaiting ecclesiastical review, though no church officially claimed jurisdiction. A 1973 inspection report noted an unusual feature beneath the floorboards of the child's bedroom. 6 square nails hammered into the wood in the shape of a bell. The name Ellie Briar resurfaced barely in 1979 in an intake form from Charleston Psychiatric Infirmary, West Virginia. The file is partially redacted, but what remains is chilling. Patient states her name is Eleanor Breyer. Found disoriented near Elk Fork, barefoot and nonverbal. Presented with symmetrical welts on both palms and deep scarring along the scalp ridge. Exhibits musical echolalia. Hums repetitive sequence in minor fifth. She was placed under observation and, after 6 months, vanished from the facility. Her bed was still warm. Her door locked from the inside. Her discharge papers unsigned. A nurse's note, scribbled in the margins, simply reads, "He came in during the 4th watch. She stood. She followed." No further sightings of Ellie Breyer were ever recorded, but the Breyers weren't the only ones who evaporated from Hollow. Vale's story, the Dutfield family, mentioned in local records from as early as 1921, also disappeared between 1961 and 1964. Roy Dutfield worked for the Laurel Creek Timber Exchange. His 3 sons were enrolled at Hollow Vale Missionary School. A letter sent to the school board in 1962 expressed concerns about changed behavior in his youngest, Caleb, who had reportedly begun drawing a door inside a circle on every surface, walls, desks, even skin. That letter was stamped address, unknown, and returned unopened by 1965. The Dutfields' property showed no signs of occupancy. Neighbors said they moved away quietly one night, though no vehicles were seen. Their dogs were left behind, all 3 found leashed to the front porch, all dead. A journal found in the house's root cellar, believed to be Roy Dutfield's, contained the phrase, "It calls them in harmony, one by one, until the song completes." None of the Dutfield boys ever enrolled in another Kentucky school. Another case. The Jude family not connected by blood, but by pattern. They were caretakers of the church grounds. According to property tax ledgers, they paid no rent, no utilities, no fees of any kind. A 1958 agreement granted them right of perpetual stay in service of the mission. But the mission, when investigated later, had no registered religious charter, no denominational affiliation, and no listed clergy. The Judes had a daughter, Ruthie. A photograph dated 1960 shows her standing outside the chapel in a white dress, holding a music book. Her smile is crooked, as though mid-song. But what stands out is what's behind her. 11 smaller children, each with eyes closed, each with hands crossed at their chests. One is barefoot in the snow. Ruthie's school record ends. Abruptly, in December 1963, the line item next to her name, where behavioral notes usually went, says only, "returned to the fold." The term appears nowhere else in Kentucky education files. Then there's Clara Penrose, known to some as a recluse, to others as a guardian of secrets. Clara lived alone at the northern edge of Hollow Vale and was responsible for cleaning the school after hours. According to a 1986 oral history interview with her niece, Clara began experiencing night terrors in 1964. She claimed to hear a bell ringing under the floorboards and spoke of children who float when they sleep. Her journal, which resurfaced in an estate sale in 2009, describes a scene that no one has been able to corroborate. February 12, 1963, I saw them again, standing in a line on the footbridge. No shoes, mouths open like they were singing, but no sound came, just the wind and the snow. I think the hymn never ends, just gets quieter when you're awake. Clara disappeared during a snowstorm in 1965. Her boots were found by the chapel gate. Her coat, buttoned and folded, lay across the church steps. Inside its pocket, a tuning fork, still resonating faintly when picked up. The strangest common thread among all these families is not their disappearance, but the way their names vanish from the paper trail. In the 1960 federal census, the surnames Breyer, Dutfield, Jude, and Penrose appear clearly. By 1970, not one of them remains in the entire county, not even in death rolls. Obituaries exist only for secondary family members, often out of state, often under misspelled names. Local genealogists attempting to trace these bloodlines have repeatedly found the same issue. Archival interference, files go missing, pages are cut from ledgers. Microfilm is smudged or scratched at just the right spot to obscure a surname. And in some cases, new names appear where the old ones should be. People who, when contacted, claim they've never heard of Hollowvale, but they own the land now. They pay the taxes. One man, listed as Merrill Darton, owns the parcel where the Breyer home once stood. When asked about the history, he reportedly said, "All I know is I don't go there after dark. Not even the deer walk that field. I don't care what it was. It ain't mine now." There's a phrase carved into a sandstone well behind the old Jude's house. It was first recorded by a surveyor in 1971, then later lost when the well was filled with gravel. A rubbing made from the stone bears the inscription, "Those marked by the bell leave no footprint. They sing instead." Researchers have argued over its meaning, but those familiar with Hollowvale's fading legacy believe it speaks to a deeper kind of vanishing, not just from life, but from memory, from history itself. These weren't just missing people. These were erased lineages, roots cut from the tree, not by accident, but by design. The story of Hollowvale isn't held in museums. It isn't printed in textbooks or framed in memorial plaques. It's held in the gaps, the blank spaces where families used to be, where records should have existed, where names once meant something, and the families who were taken, the Breyers, the Dutfields, the Judes, they weren't just forgotten, they were forbidden from being remembered. The true theology of Hollowvale was never preached from the pulpit. It was whispered through floorboards, etched behind hymnals, and drilled into children who were too young to know the difference between worship and obedience. To understand how 22 students could vanish without a single official search party, we have to descend literally into the dark underbelly of St. Elisha's chapel, where faith became a mechanism of erasure. The first clue arrives in a thin, hand-stitched booklet found in the Diocesan Archive of Bowling Green in 2004. Its linen cover is blank except for a smudged bell-shaped watermark. Inside, 41 pages of scripture, but not as we know it. Verses from Luke and Matthew are rearranged, certain words replaced. Lo, the little ones shall dwell in boxes of peace. The choir shall not break its hush, lest the earth split in mourning. Each altered line is underlined in red wax pencil, the flourish curving into a tiny hook, as if the annotator were tugging the text toward a secret meaning. The booklet's flyleaf bears a date, March 1st, 1956. Beneath it, a name, J.E. Halbrook. That name, already infamous in the sealed audit, now stands revealed as the architect of a doctrine that repurposed ordinary Christian ritual into something colder, quieter, and infinitely more permanent. A 1961 maintenance ledger, salvaged from county sanitation records, notes unusual subsurface chambers beneath the chapel, 3 rooms lined in cedar, no state inspection tag, no HVAC. The rooms were not on any blueprint submitted to building inspectors. They appear to have been excavated after the chapel's construction, hand-hewn into the limestone. The largest chamber, 30 feet long, 8 feet wide, was built in parish minutes as the choir room, but photographs taken by a fire marshal in 1976 show walls scarred by chains at ankle height, and floorboards patched at uneven intervals, as though repeatedly pried open and nailed shut again. Tacked too. One wall was a schedule, written in chalk that fire could not erase. Monday, minor hymn silence. Tuesday, prayer of still voices. Wednesday, evening veil. Thursday, box sermon. Friday, shallow rehearsal. No times, no teachers, no signature, just the outline of a week where the lessons were measured in hush rather than words. County. Librarian Hester Quill, who catalogued the marshal's photos in the late 1980s, made a strange observation in her field notes. Every surface down there is grooved, as if small fingers drummed the same pattern for years. She traced one groove with chalk and realized it spelled Cantare ad Lucium, the same Latin refrain that appears at the bottom of Hollowvale's 1962 lesson plans, Sing to the light. But light never reached those cedar walls. The only illumination was a single gas lantern, its globe blackened with soot, hanging crooked from a chain school punishment logs. Miraculously spared from the 1975 fire because they were stored off-site for annual diocesan review, reveal how the doctrine was enforced. The 15th of October 1962, Joshua Deere refused to hush during veiling. Remedy, 2 hours in reverence box, no. Bread, intermittent ringing. The 2nd of November 1962, Ruth J. Zhang, melody, out of key. Remedy, hands bound. Silence mask applied. The 11th of December 1962, Caleb D. attempted escape. Remedy, bell drill. Return to stillness, 2 days. The reverence box appears in multiple entries. It was described by former custodian Clara Penrose as a pine coffin with holes drilled only on one. Side 1 if the child behaved, none if he didn't. Clara's journal adds a cruel detail. The holes faced the wall, so even the illusion of breathing felt earned. Perhaps the most disturbing artifact tied to these rites is the Book of Closed Eyes, now housed under restricted access at the University of Louisville's Folklore Archive. The book is a ledger, every page filled with children's names first, and middle only, followed by 2 columns, hum and quiet. Beside each name, red check marks indicate successful compliance. 22 names have a 3rd symbol. A bell stamped over both columns, obliterating the checks beneath. A note at the top of that page reads, Choir completed, do not reopen. Handwriting analysis confirms the ledger was kept by Sister Margaret Locke, a teacher transferred to Hollowvale from a Cincinnati convent in 1960. She returned to the convent in 1964, the year after the disappearances. Interviewed in 1998, Sister Margaret claimed total amnesia of her time in Kentucky. When shown photographs of the ledger, she wept, not because she remembered, but because she said, I keep hearing a chord that never resolves. She died 3 days later, cause listed as sudden cardiac arrest. The ledger vanished from postal tracking on its way back to archives. It reappeared in a locked basement drawer 8 months later, unopened, wrapped in cloth that smelled of cedar. All doctrines need a scripture, a ritual, a promise. But Hollowvale's promise was inverted. Salvation through stillness, through hush so deep it drowns the soul. The children were taught that noise invited the veiled ones, unnamed spirits said to lurk in Appalachian hollers, hungry for careless song. The only safe hymn was the minor fifth lullaby, a descending motif sung with mouths almost closed. Local elders recall hearing it float across the valley at dusk, thin as a mosquito's whine. One farmer, Earl Skeggs, told the Laurel Creek Courier in 1972, "It was like the wind wanted to be a choir but forgot how to breathe." Micro-twists of moral logic wound the children into compliance. If they hummed out of key, they endangered their peers. If they spoke during veiling, they invited the veiled ones in. Silence became a group project. Terror became communal. Failure wasn't punished. It was absorbed each broken rule, thickening the collective guilt, sharpening the urge to hush. In 1984, paranormal researcher Quentin Sharp smuggled a cassette recorder into the basement during an unsanctioned night visit. The tape, though degraded, captures a low-frequency resonance, 4 notes descending, then a pause, then what sounds like small breaths exhaling in unison. Sharp reported feeling a pressure in his skull, as though someone else's memories were pushing mine aside. He left after 6 minutes, vomiting in the grass. He died by suicide 5 years later. His final note, "They're still in the box, but the melody leaks." An audio spectrogram of the recording reveals hidden layers, whispered numerals counting from 1 to 22, each followed by the scrape of wood on wood. Audio technicians have suggested it might be the sound of coffins shifting against each other. Skeptics insist it's water dripping in an empty cistern. Yet when independent journalist Dalia Mendez tried to replicate the recording in 2001, the basement refused to echo at all. Her microphone picked up nothing. No air, no footsteps, just a void, as if sound itself refused to manifest. The theology that germinated in that basement did not end with the fire. Hand-copied Bibles bearing the bell watermark have surfaced. Across Appalachian estate sales, attics, and goodwill bins, each contains a single marginalia. When the choir is whole, the veil shall open. None of the finders claim to know how the books got there. One widow, Mary Ellen Price, found hers in a sealed hope chest. She had no children, yet a child's scrawl on the flyleaf spelled her maiden name backwards. More alarming is a pattern, discovered in child discipline manuals, distributed to small church schools in the 1970s. Among sections on attendance and catechism lies an appendix titled Maintenance of Reverent Silence. The steps mirror hollow veils, veiling ritual. Blindfolds, solitary hush, nocturnal hymns. According to shipping ledgers, those manuals were printed by a press shutdown for inventory irregularities in 1976. The owner of the press was Jonathan Ezra Halbrook. What kept these practices alive was not open conspiracy, but a network of quiet custodians, traveling ministers who preached short revivals, substitute teachers who volunteered for rural missions, widows who kept an extra bedroom for visiting choir children. They did not call themselves a church. They called themselves the Stillness Fellowshipper, name appearing only in 2 places: a 1968 Indiana land transfer and the unsigned meeting minutes pinned to the basement wall the night before Hollowvale burned. The minutes conclude with a phrase, "Choir in complete fire," as veil, not conclusion. It implies the blaze was not an accident, but a liturgy, a coda to silence the building when the choir could not be made whole. They say babies born in Hollowvale didn't cry, not once, and if they did, the bells would ring. Strange, then, that no delivery records exist for the town after 1958. While the school's enrollment climbed until 1963, where did the infants go? Why did a school built for 40 students never list more than 22? Perhaps the doctrine demanded that every space left vacant be an invitation, an unfilled note in an unfinished chord. And maybe the children knew. Maybe they felt the song pulling them downward, note by note, until all that remained above ground were scratches on paper, empty shoes by the door, and mothers who believed their children had simply transferred away. The fire was not the first event, but it was the first that outsiders couldn't explain away. On December 6, 1963, just after midnight, an orange glow was seen blooming above the ridgeline that shielded Hollowvale from the main road. The glow pulsed, steady and slow, as if breathing. At 12:41 a.m., the Laurel Creek Fire Department received a call from an anonymous male voice, described by the dispatcher as soft, like someone reading through a wall. The message was brief. The children are ready. The building must sleep. By the time responders arrived at the Hollowvale Missionary School, the main building was engulfed, but there was no heat, no visible flame, only smoke, thick and strangely sweet, rising through the cracks between roof shingles and curling. Out from beneath the chapel door, the firemen later testified that there were no signs of fire damage to the walls or ceiling. The flames, they said, seemed to hover, like it didn't want to burn, just wanted to be seen. The official report, filed under incident number 63K, WEF 102, described the scene in procedural terms. No fatalities recovered. Structure loss estimated at 68%. Primary source of combustion undetermined. Unusual absence of soot patterns or char marks consistent with standard fire behavior. Possible chemical accelerant untraceable. But an internal memo, sealed until 1989, contains a different set of observations by Fire Chief Harlan Stokes. Desks overturned, meal trays half full, chalk on the board, still damp, but not a single footprint in or out. Not even ash trails. It was like they evaporated. He underlined the phrase, "No signs of panic." 3 days later, a reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal, Monica Leclerc, visited the site. She was the first non-local to ask questions about the children. She never got any answers. The community, what was left of it, had turned inward. Of the 9 households still listed in the township, 7 refused to speak. 2 homes were found empty, their doors ajar, dinner plates still set. Monica returned to her hotel that night with a half-finished draft of an article tentatively titled, "The Fire with No Children." She filed it to her editor. It never ran. The following week, she was reassigned to a different beat. She died in a car accident in 1969. Her notes on Hollowvale, including photographs and a tape recorder, were boxed and donated to the Kentucky Historical Society. The recorder was blank. The photographs came out entirely black. On the box was a single slip of paper, "Do not archive." Still, there were cracks, small ones. That same week, a school nurse from Stanton, who had briefly substituted at Hollowvale in October, submitted a letter to the State Board of Education. In it, she reported disturbing behavior from the students during her 2-week assignment. No eye contact, no free play, all movement coordinated, as if in silent rehearsal. One child, who I was told was named Ruthie, sat in the hallway with a blindfold. I removed it and she screamed, not in fear, but as if I'd broken a vow. The letter was marked unsubstantiated and filed without follow-up. But 2 months later, the nurse herself, Miriam Dalton, was committed to the Western State Hospital for what her admitting psychiatrist called hymnal delusion disorder. She reportedly couldn't stop humming a tune no one else recognized. She called it The Last Choir. She died in 1972. The song died with her. Another anomaly emerged in the days following the fire. No parents came forward, not one obituary, not one complaint filed, not a single documented attempt to retrieve belongings from the school site. 22 students, and not a single body of kin raised a question, at least, not publicly. One explanation often cited is the remoteness of Hollow Vale. Many of the students, according to school records, came from distant counties or had no known address at all. Some were listed only as boarded by mission custody. No retrieval required. This phrase appears on 8 of the 22 file jackets retrieved from the Department of Education archives. None list actual guardians, but internal parish documentation, unearthed from a separate diocesan archive, reveals a strange contradiction. In a 1961 letter from Father Halbrook to an unnamed overseer, he writes, "The children will be placed. Their mouths are still and their minds are ready. The flesh resists, but the song smooths it." There is no mention of curriculum, no mention of academic testing, lesson plans, or holidays. Only song. Perhaps the most disturbing official response came from the Commonwealth Attorney General's office in March 1964, 3 months after the fire, when a junior clerk attempted to open an inquiry into the use of public funds for Hollow Vale. He was met with a reply stamped Directive 11F, Ecclesiastical Resolution. The clause, not known to the public at the time, allowed for any religious institution to forego state auditing if its spiritual practices were deemed none. In other words, the church governed itself. The school, technically a choir boarding program under diocesan grant funding, was exempt from all transparency. In a note later attached to the file, the clerk wrote, "There are fewer laws for the holy, and even fewer for the quiet." But there were whispers in town. Earl Timmons, a janitor who worked at the post office and occasionally helped shovel coal for the chapel furnace, spoke in a 1985 oral history interview of something he saw a week before the fire. They was lining up across the footbridge, kids, barefoot, just standing there with their mouths open like they were singing. But no sound came out, and one of them had rope marks on her wrists. "I just went home, didn't even finish my shift." He died 3 months after the interview. The recording of his voice carries a sound in the background, faint and rhythmic, like a metronome ticking underwater. That tape, when played in reverse, echoes a tune scholars now identify as a minor fifth progression. Same structure as the 11th lullaby, a melody preserved in folklore but never officially published. The event most publicly visible was the bell, recovered by the firemen and stored in the Laurel Creek Municipal Depot for over 2 decades. It was made of brass, no clapper inside, and yet several depot workers reported hearing it ring always around 3:15 a.m. It was removed in 1990 and stored in a sealed shipping container. The logbook for its location ends with a single redacted line: "When the container was opened." In 2006, by a group of historical researchers, the bell was gone. In its place was a single white ribbon tied in a loop. Attached to it, a paper tag reading, "Still in rehearsal." Of all the lingering signs, perhaps the strangest is this: in the weeks following the fire, the wind never returned to Hollow Vale, where the records from the nearby Laurel Creek station showed dead calm, no wind above 1 mph for 23 straight days. Trees stood still, Smoke from chimneys curled and fell. The creek, once known for its babble, became quiet, even during rain. One observer described it as like the air had been scalded into silence. Locals say that was the choir finishing, that the children had completed their final refrain, that the wind was no longer needed to carry the song. In total, no one was prosecuted, no trial was ever held, and no school under that name or any other was ever rebuilt on the site. The building was gone, but the ritual remained, even today. Hikers who wander too close to the ruins report hearing, humming, always faint, always childlike, and always in threes. 3 notes rising, then silence. Some say it continues only if you stand still and listen long enough. Some say the earth beneath your feet will hum back. Officially, no one survived Hollowvale, at least, no one who spoke of it clearly. No one whose story remained long enough in the system to be corroborated by multiple sources. But there are cracks, slivers of narrative that shimmer through. The dust of time like half-heard echoes, and in those slivers, a pattern begins to form. The first confirmed testimony tied to the school came from a child admitted to Western State Hospital in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, on February 18, 1964. Just 2 months after the fire. His name was redacted in all public versions of the intake forms, but notes refer to him only as patient 2 to a male EST. 9 years, found near Trestle Bridge, unaccompanied, nonverbal. He was discovered barefoot and covered in soot, clutching a wooden block carved with the letter R. On the underside of the block was a deep scratch in the shape of a bell. Medical staff noted that he flinched violently at the sound of piano. Chords and would only calm when someone hummed a descending 3-note melody. He never spoke, but he listened, especially when others sang. After 3 weeks, he vanished from the secure ward. Staff assumed a transfer error, yet no paperwork existed, and the internal security logs for that night were mysteriously blank. The only clue was a nurse's personal note in the margin of a shift report. He stared at the chapel outside the window, said nothing. Then the smoke alarm chirped, and when we checked the room, he was gone. No window open, no print on the floor. Patient to 2A was never seen again. But the most chilling and detailed witness account comes from Eula Grace Withers, last known music teacher at Hollowvale Missionary School. Her name appears in the 1962 payroll register and again in a diocesan boarding ledger from the fall of 1963. She would have been in her early 40s at the time of the fire. She was committed to Eastern State Hospital in 1965 under an alias, Sarah May Cross. Her identity wasn't confirmed until a routine cross-check of archived institutional records in 1988 revealed matching handwriting and an identical birth date. Eula's psychiatric file is nearly 300 pages long, a labyrinth of fragmented hymns, hallucinated children, and references to the still choir. But it's her 1966 psychological evaluation tape, transcribed by staff and labeled Session 4, The Bell Children, that has haunted investigators ever since. A segment of the transcript reads, "They don't scream, that's what they teach them. First you hum, then you hush. Then you lie still while the veil takes shape around you. One mistake, one wrong note, and the bells come early." She goes on to describe a room beneath the chapel where the children were made to sing. Through blind. "It's how they practice," she said. "So they forget what a face looks like. All they hear is the choir and the scrape of the nails in the wood when the lesson ends." When asked about the 22 missing students, she whispered, A single phrase. The song needed to end on silence. Shortly after that session, Eula tore out her own tongue using a broken pen from her bedside drawer. She survived, barely. When asked why she did it, she scrawled on the wall of her room, "So, I can't finish the hymn." She died in 1971. Her tongue was buried separately, sealed in a cedar box. Another witness, this time not institutionalized, surfaced decades later, though few took her seriously at first. Teresa Lund, age 63, contacted a regional folklore researcher in 1997, claiming that her older sister, Marlene, had attended Hollowvale in 1962 and was one of the soft-voiced ones. At the time, Teresa had been too young to attend, but she remembered Marlene practicing odd chants at night. It wasn't music, she said. It was a waiting kind of sound, like calling something from underneath. On the night of the fire, Teresa recalled waking to find her sister standing at the edge of the footbridge, barefoot in the snow, swaying silently with her arms crossed. She wasn't sad, just finished, like she'd been used up. Teresa went to get her mother. When they returned, the bridge was empty. No tracks in the snow, no sign of Marlene. A small bell sat in her place, warm to the touch despite the frigid air. Her family never filed a report. The pastor told us not to, Teresa said. Said she'd fulfilled her role and that God's choir needed stillness now. When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, Teresa responded, "Because some songs don't end when the sound stops. They keep ringing, in your walls, in your blood." She refused to speak further. She died of heart failure in 2001. No next of kin came to collect her body. A final witness comes from an unlikely place, a 1964 juvenile correctional intake form. From Harlan County, a boy named Levi Brenner, age 10, was picked up for trespassing on a rail line near the Hollowvale boundary. When questioned by police, he insisted he was trying to get back in before they sealed the doors. The officer assumed he was high or confused, but in the intake notes, the boy said something strange. "They left without me. I fell asleep. During rehearsal, they closed the lids, and I was still out here. I don't know the rest of the song. I don't know how to get quiet again." Levi was held for 4 days before being sent to a foster placement in northern Kentucky. He vanished. During transit, the driver's log simply notes, "Restroom stop in McKee. Returned to vehicle. Passenger missing." A folded paper was found on Levi's empty seat. It contained musical notation for 5 descending notes, written in charcoal. The final note had been scratched out entirely. These are not random tales, not isolated accounts. Each witness who surfaced, whether child, teacher, or sibling, spoke of structure, of sequence, of a song that must be completed or else remain unfinished forever. It's not madness, not delusion. It's liturgy, one designed not for worship, but for disappearance. What remains terrifying is how uniform these accounts are, how the melody, the veil, the rehearsal, and the bell recur across different decades, different witnesses, none of whom ever met, and how those who spoke it aloud either died suddenly, vanished, or fell into a silence so complete it might as well have been death. Even in the psychiatric notes, there is a phrase repeated in at least 3 different files: they weren't punished for what they did. They were punished for what they remembered. To this day, no official investigation has been reopened. The children remain unaccounted for. The files, what little exists of them, sit in storage boxes, labeled discontinued case. Every few years, someone uncovers a new scrap, a forgotten ledger, a scorched photo, a hymn fragment in a dusty attic. But those aren't documents, they're remnants of a ritual, one that can only end if all 22 return, or if the final note is sealed forever. By the time the final embers of Hollow Vale cooled, the cover-up had already begun. It didn't start with secrecy. It started with silence, the kind of bureaucratic quiet that seeps into systems, not with force, but with absence. No headlines, no lawsuits, no press releases from the Kentucky Department of Education or the diocese that had once blessed the school. And yet the records didn't just go missing. They were systematically unmade. The first to notice was a local archivist named Benjamin Thrace, who, in 1980, filed a Freedom of Information Act request for school funding ledgers tied to Kentucky's 1960s diocesan charter program. He received 2 manila folders. Both were stamped reconciled. Both were mostly blank. Each folder contained one item. The first, a 1961 receipt for 22 child-sized cots ordered by Hollow Vale Missionary School. The note attached said, "Expedited. Delivery for winter preparation." The second, a December 1963 telegram to the Office of Non-Public Instruction, signed only J.E.H. reading, "The rehearsal is concluded. The site may be returned to soil. No further inspection required." The telegram was typed. The signature was handwritten in red ink. In 1985, a student journalist from the University of Kentucky named Irene Mallory attempted to revisit the site and cross-reference surviving land deeds. What she discovered sparked the first and last modern inquiry into Hollow Vale's suppression. She found that the property parcel listed as belonging to the school no longer existed. Instead, it had been absorbed into Commonwealth Forestry, Management District 12, a designation reserved for state-controlled wilderness areas. But the Forestry Office had no record of trees ever being planted there. A field officer's map from 1972 even shows a blank spot where the school once stood, literally blank, not unmarked, just white. Her article, titled "The School That Wasn't There," was submitted to the university paper. It never ran. A week later, Irene withdrew from the university. No one has heard from her since. Her dorm room, according to campus security logs, was found locked from the inside. Nothing disturbed. Only a note taped to the inside of the door. "Do not disturb the silence." County fire records from December 1963 list the Hollow Vale blaze as Incident Aonzi. No further reporting. The A11 designation doesn't exist in the public version of Kentucky's fire incident codes. In fact, state fire officials contacted in 2006 insisted that such a classification had never been part of the reporting system. And yet, the document sits in the file, faded, scanned, and flagged in red. A sticky note from a later archivist simply reads, "Format changed in 72. These may have used the old rubric. Or it was ... internal. The word appears often in multiple memos from the Attorney General's office in 1964. Hollow Vale is mentioned only once, and only in reference to a Directive 11F ecclesiastical resolution. That same clause would later be cited in a 1971 suppression of abuse allegations at a Jesuit-run boarding school in Pike County. In both cases, the clause allowed religious institutions to handle matters of internal discipline and death with spiritual discretion. Spiritual discretion, in Hollow Vale's case, meant 22 children disappearing without inquiry. One of the few concrete attempts to investigate came in 1973, when State Senator Harold Levers quietly proposed a bill requiring retroactive audits of all state-funded religious boarding schools operating between 1955 and 1965. The bill never made it out of committee. The session transcripts are missing, replaced by a notation: audio malfunction, no recordable discussion. Senator Levers was killed in a hunting accident that October. His body was found without visible trauma, just a single line of bruising around the throat. The coroner listed it as strangulation due to fall against rifle strap. There was no further mention of the bill. Then came the fire. Not the Hollow Vale fire, but the 1975 blaze that destroyed the Clay County Clerk's office, along with the entire basement archive. According to the fire report, the blaze originated in an old furnace duct, igniting a shelf of ecclesiastical files awaiting transfer. Lost in that fire were the original Hollow Vale attendance ledgers, the 1960-1963 diocesan correspondence, logbooks, property, tax receipts for the chapel and school grounds, all family deed, transfers for the Briar, Dudfield, and Jude households. Shelves on either side survived. When insurance assessors questioned the anomaly, a clerk reportedly said, "It burned what needed burning, and left the rest to us." One case file did survive, but only because it was in private hands. A former deputy sheriff, Ralph Cletton, had taken home copies of child welfare visit reports for Hollow Vale. He said they didn't sit right with him. One page, dated October 2, 1963, describes a routine visit to the school. Children lined in hallway, all silent, refused to speak or make eye contact. One girl wrote on a slip of paper, "We're learning to be small." Clayton tried to escalate the report. He was told by the sheriff at the time, "Let the Bells handle it." Clayton retired early and moved west. He mailed the copies to his cousin in Ohio before his death in 1992. They remained in a sealed box until 2010, when a local historian discovered them among estate sale items. The reports are now considered unofficial and unverified. Suppression didn't just come from state channels. The church hierarchy played its part. 2. The Diocese of Lexington, which oversaw the Hollow Vale region, issued only one internal statement after the fire. "The Lord calls his children in many ways. We grieve their loss and celebrate their eternal music." That quote appears in a 1964 Easter bulletin and nowhere else. No formal inquiry, no spiritual audit, no parish-level investigation into Father Halbrook's program. In fact, no priest named Halbrook appears in any official diocesan registry before or after Hollow Vale. And yet, in a 1966 legal deposition related to land use disputes in Breathitt County, a man claiming to be Father J. Ezra Halbrook signed off on a notarized document. His signature matched that of the telegram found in Benjamin Thrace's FOIA packet. The land in question, a former coal site, now empty, where witnesses later reported seeing barefoot children standing in the snow, humming toward the ground. What kind of force could keep a town quiet for 60 years? Fear, yes, but also design. Records weren't merely lost, they were replaced. Every time someone tried to open a file, they were met with smoke, not fire, obstruction, not erasure. A record that ends with "see addendum," but the addendum doesn't exist. A tape that plays static. A photo that develops as fog. A name that keeps changing spelling in every report. We aren't dealing with incompetence. We're dealing with architecture, a system designed not to hide a mistake, but to preserve a ritual, to protect a silence so profound that even truth cannot ring through it without being muffled. They burned the records. They closed the roads. They buried the names beneath ecclesiastical exemptions and clerical fog. But they forgot one thing. The children weren't just witnesses. They were the liturgy. They were the verse, and verse doesn't die. It echoes. The Hollow Vale Missionary School may have burned, but the church beside it, D.St. Elisha's, by the creek, or what remains of it, still stands. A skeletal shell clinging to the edge of the valley. No steeple, no pews, no congregation. Just warped floorboards, blackened rafters, and a bell tower with no bell. It should have collapsed decades ago. Locals say it won't. Not until the last name is spoken, and when the wind passes through, it doesn't whistle. It hums. In 1987, two theology students from Berea College, Lydia Moore and Sam Ellis, hiked to Hollowvale to explore the chapel ruins. For a thesis on spiritual trauma in post-agrarian religious sites. What they found never made it into their paper. Their 14-minute VHS tape, recovered in 2005 from a university. Archive misfiled under agricultural erosion footage. Shows the two entering the chapel from the east side. The floor is warped, the altar scorched, the walls hollowed out. Then they descend a narrow stairwell, one not listed on any known blueprint. They discover a sealed cedar door with no knob. Sam runs his fingers across the grain. The wood responds. With a soft vibration, Lydia gasps. The video jitters and cuts to black. The last 30 seconds of the tape are audio only, shallow breathing, a low melodic hum, and a voice faint female, repeating, "Still in rehearsal, still in rehearsal." Still, Lydia never returned to Berea. Sam was found 2 days later in a motel 60 miles east, disoriented, shoes missing, mouth full of dirt. When questioned, he only said, "There's something wrong with the door. You. Don't open it, it opens you." In 1999, a hiker named Corey Vantrell from Tennessee posted on an early online paranormal forum that he'd found a circle of child-sized shoes arranged on the steps of the chapel. All were left-facing. All were tied with ribbons bearing initials, EB, CD, RJ. He returned the next day with a camera crew. Nothing remained. Not the shoes, not the ribbons, not even the steps, now overgrown with knotweed, as if they'd never been there. A year later, Corey was arrested for disturbing the grounds of a children's cemetery near Pineville, Kentucky. He claimed he was trying to listen for the box under the church. He was found dead in his cell. 3 days later, a spiral scratched into his chest with a nail. Autopsy noted the shape resembled a treble clef. The chapel wasn't a church by standard. Records, it had no tax ID, no affiliation, no architectural files on record, but maps from the Kentucky Land Use Survey of 1955 clearly mark the building's footprint in red ink. A handwritten note beside it reads, "Sacral anomaly, leave unclassified." When pressed in 2001, a retired cartographer who worked on the survey admitted it didn't cast a shadow. Not in photos, not on foot. You'd walk around it, and the sun just ... skipped over. In 2006, a small group of folklore researchers calling themselves the Acolyte Project visited the site under special permission from the Clay County Historical Society. They brought digital audio equipment, motion sensors, ground-penetrating radar, all in hopes of mapping what lay beneath. The trip lasted 8 hours. They recorded nothing, no motion, no sound. Their radar data corrupted upon entry, replaced, with overlapping file names reading 22_sing_22_sing_22. Their report contains one quote that made it into national folklore databases. "We didn't hear silence. We heard what comes after silence." The group disbanded the following year. Still, the building remains. Locals don't go near it. They don't speak of it. But it's there and not untouched. Teenagers who attempt dares on Halloween return. Nauseous paragliders who land near it claim their GPS watches reset. One drone pilot reported his controls went soft, like the drone didn't want to fly above it. The footage recovered shows the drone circling the bell tower, before dropping hard, not crashing but descending as if placed. Its last image. An open doorway, beyond it dark. Yet the drone's accelerometer noted no impact, just stillness. In 2014, a woman named Danica Heffernan, hiking alone, documented what she believed was the entrance to a previously undiscovered basement crawlspace beneath the altar. She found a wooden hatch sealed with 6 rusted nails, carved into it. All verses are counted. Awaiting conductor, she photographed it. By the time she returned with park rangers, 2 days later, the hatch had been replaced by flat stone, weathered, unmarked. She posted the photo to her blog. The site crashed a week later. No backup. Her camera's SD card, mailed to a paranormal journal for examination, arrived blank. Danica later described the experience on a podcast. "It didn't want to be found. It just wanted me to know." It was still waiting, like a theater holding its breath. She has since refused to speak publicly again. The structure itself seems responsive in a 2018 study on acoustic anomalies in Appalachian ruins. Audio engineers noted that St. Elisha's Chapel has a unique reverberation curve, one that absorbs mid-range human frequencies. To put it plainly, if you speak at a normal volume inside, the room swallows your words. Only low hums and whispers bounce back. Everything else vanishes, as if the building refuses articulation. One audio technician theorized that the chapel's unique decay rate encourages compliance with its original purpose, liturgical silence. Another theory is simpler. It's still listening. And then there's the bell tower. The bell itself was removed in 1964 and stored in municipal archives until its unexplained disappearance in 1990. But the tower still responds. Multiple visitors have reported hearing bells chime from within, always at 3:15 a.m. Always 3 notes descending. One man, Thomas Elbridge, claimed he slept in the ruins for a bet. At precisely 3:15, he awoke to what he described as a bell ringing from my own chest. He staggered out, vomiting. Said he could feel the echo beneath his ribs for days. A hospital scan 2 weeks later showed scar tissue in the shape of a bell on the left ventricle. He had no prior heart conditions. The structure has resisted collapse through storm, snow, even targeted demolition attempts. In 1998, a team from the Kentucky Rural Safety Council tried to bring it down as part of a hazard mitigation initiative. They got as far as removing the roof trusses before the lead contractor quit, citing an overwhelming sense of dread. Asterisk, "It's not a building," he said. "It's a recording." The initiative was abandoned. The tower still stands. To those who know, the building is no longer seen as a ruin. It's seen as a repository, an unfinished stanza. in a song that can't end because the choir is still missing. The church wasn't destroyed with the school, it was spared because something beneath it hasn't finished humming. In the most recent account, from 2022, a group of amateur ghost hunters documented a low vibration coming from the earth under the chapel floor. Their equipment showed a consistent 22 Hz frequency, a subaudible resonance often associated with unease, nausea, and inexplicable sorrow. When amplified and run through spectral analysis, the sound formed a wave pattern resembling musical notation. The key, D minor, same as the 11th lullaby, same as every other hymn whispered in these files. Still standing, still wrong, not a place of worship anymore, a place of rehearsal, a waiting room for the unfinished. Hollow Vale wasn't the only place. That's the part that comes later. Like a slow burn through paperwork, old ledgers, torn census pages, and school rosters scattered across Appalachian counties, like they were trying to stay hidden, Hollow Vale was the loudest silence. But not the first, not the only. What began as an isolated tragedy, 22 vanished children, one burned school, a church that won't fall, turns into something worse when you start noticing the repeats. Same types of children, same rituals, same phrases in different mouths, same names whispered across county lines, always just before another child goes missing or a chapel door is nailed shut from the inside. It's not a story, it's a pattern, and it's everywhere once you start looking. Take Black Hollow School, Breathitt County, 1949. 6 students, ages 6 through 9, quietly removed from enrollment over the course of 4 weeks. No parental pickup, no recorded illness. Attendance slips simply start skipping their names, as if someone had pressed backspace hard enough to erase memory. A local teacher, Miss Abigail Horn, filed a disciplinary complaint that same month, noting that one student, Matthew R., had begun humming in class, but only when others were silent. He refused to speak, just stared at the ceiling beams and mouthed 3 descending tones. The superintendent filed her letter, under spiritual exemption, stamped it closed, and reassigned her within 48 hours. Her replacement taught 2 more semesters before quitting. She left behind a chalkboard message scrawled in childish handwriting. They left the song open. We have to finish. Jump to Goshen Ridge, 1953, a rural church school built on donated farmland. Population, 13 families. 3 children vanished from the roll book that December. The official reason, transferred to religious retreat. No forwarding address. No graduation record. When state officials attempted to follow up, they were told the church had burned down. But it hadn't. A field agent who visited in 1954 found it standing, abandoned. Doors padlocked from the inside, windows blacked out with tar paper. He peered through a crack, saw rows of child-sized chairs, all facing the center, where a white cloth was folded on the floor like an altar napkin. He knocked, heard a sound, 3 knocks back. Not an echo, a reply. He left. The file was closed. The church was bulldozed the following year. Then there's Redbridge, 1957. Not a school this time. A foster home run by the Marlin family, known in county records for taking in spiritually troubled youth. 6 children placed under their care. Within 2 months, 3 had relocated, according to case files. No names listed. Just a note in all caps. Sacred choir assignment approved. What kind of system allows child placements to be labeled sacred? The home itself had no affiliation with any religious denomination, and yet Interviews with a neighbor revealed something haunting. They'd march the kids out every morning. No shoes, even in frost. They'd stand in a line by the tree stump. I never heard them talk. Just ... That sound, low and deep. Like prayer, but sadder. The Marlins left town in 1959. No forwarding address. By the early 1960s, the same signs appear across 4 counties: Laurel, Perry, and Clay. Attendance rolls with redacted names. Children marked spiritually incomplete or veiled private basement rooms not on building plans. The recurring name, Halbrook, often with different initials. Each location also shares a chilling architectural anomaly. Footprint parity. Meaning the dimensions of the schoolrooms, the size of the choir space, the angles of the stairwells, mirror hollow veils, chapel layout, down to the inch, not replicated, copied. One blueprint from Orchardsvale Day School, submitted in 1961, is a near-perfect match to Hollow Vale's unreleased chapel schematic. Yet the schools were 80 miles apart, served different denominations, and had no known connection. How does a building get copied when the original plans were never made public? Unless there's something shared underneath. A blueprint older than the buildings themselves. Genealogists studying the family names of Hollow Vale began noticing overlaps with other counties. The Breyer surname appears in a 1931 missing persons report in Laurel County. A child who disappeared from a traveling choir. Her name, Eleanor. Same as Ellie Breyer, the girl who reappeared outside a psychiatric ward 20 years later. The Dupfield name recurs in land ledgers outside Lexington, tied to an unregistered chapel sold off in 1948. That building's basement was sealed. Records of what lay below the Jude family, caretakers of Hollow Vale, trace back to an 1897 religious community in Tennessee that mysteriously disbanded after 8 children reportedly left the flesh and joined the choir. Again, that word, choir, it doesn't mean music anymore. It means something collective, something ritualized, something that requires children to be gathered, ordered, and made silent, one note at a time. The phrase, still in rehearsal, appears in Marginalia from a 1955 seminary journal found in Cincinnati. If the conductor is delayed, the bodies must remain soft, still in rehearsal, awaiting signal. When did choir rehearsal become a metaphor for permanent preparation, for a state of endless readiness that swallows entire classrooms? There's even a pattern in how the disappearances are treated. Same official responses, same euphemisms, transferred to mission, ecclesiastical reassignment, spiritual preparation underway. No retrieval requested, but who is authoring these phrases? Who is granting permission for this language to exist across decades, and counties and institutions, and more importantly, ... Who's listening to the song? The modern-day footprint of this pattern is still visible in 2020. A Reddit thread titled, "The Choir Children You Can't Find," featured dozens of users from Appalachia sharing eerily similar stories. Old schools with rooms no one was allowed to enter, bells that rang at dusk, prayers sung in descending. Keys.one user posted a photo of a chalkboard discovered in an abandoned church near Hazard, Kentucky. On it, scrawled in a child's hand, "We will sit until they call the note." The post was removed within 24 hours. The user's account deleted. No explanation given, but archived versions exist. The handwriting matches that of a Hollow Vale. Ledger dated 1963. Patterns don't lie. They emerge slowly, like a chorus building beneath the melody, soft at first, then undeniable. And what Hollow Vale reveals is not an isolated horror, but a network, a map of churches, homes, and schools tuned to the same dark frequency. Structures not designed to educate or heal, but to preserve silence, to bind stillness into bodies too small to understand why they were being taught to stop speaking. Hollow Vale wasn't a school, it was a stanza in a hymn that spans decades, and every missing child, every vanishing surname, every erased photograph is a note in that unfinished song, a song we are still hearing, even now. Asterisk. They say songs never die, they just go quiet. For decades, Hollow Vale faded from the record, from the roads, from the mouths of those who lived too close to it. The land was sealed, the files redacted, the bell silenced. But silence isn't the same as absence, and lately the hymn is being heard again, not in the churches, not in the schools, but in bedrooms, in crayon drawings, in whispers from children who don't know what they're repeating. The stillness is waking, and the choir, it seems, has started humming again. In April of 2018, an elementary school teacher at Clay County Middle School filed a mandatory behavioral report after 4 second-grade students, independently and without prompting, turned in art projects depicting a circular staircase descending into the ground. Each labeled the drawing differently. The music steps, the box I sleep in where. We wait under the bell. All 4 children lived in different neighborhoods. None were related. But when their parents were interviewed, they admitted to finding their children humming in their sleep, 3-note refrains, always descending, always in a minor key. One mother recorded her daughter sleep humming and uploaded it to a local parenting group. The audio was pulled offline within 48 hours. Her account was flagged for disturbing content. She received no explanation, but those who heard it before it vanished say it matched the cadence of the 11th lullaby, a hymn last referenced in a 1961 diary fragment recovered from the Hollow Vale site in 2020. A Facebook group titled "I Dreamed the Hymn" appeared. At first glance, it resembled a typical spiritual support page until the posts began piling up. Hundreds of people from across the Appalachian region sharing identical dreams. A footbridge at night, covered in frost, a line of children, barefoot, humming with mouths closed, a voice counting from 1 to 20-2, a hatch beneath a chapel, warm to the touch, a conductor with no face, holding a ribbon instead of a baton. One user posted a map sketch from her dream. It aligned perfectly with the lost blueprints of Hollow Vale's chapel basement blueprints. Never released to the public, the group was shut down 3 months later. Archived screenshots show a final post from the admin account before deletion. They said the song was buried, but the breath was never held. They're still exhaling. In 2021, a kindergarten student in Wolfe County was suspended for scratching a symbol into his desk using a pencil tip. The symbol, a notched cross surrounded by a circle, the same icon, found carved above the cedar hatch in the Hollow Vale Chapel, and stamped onto the recovered 1962 hymn books, labeled still in rehearsal. When asked what it meant, the boy whispered, "It's how they know I'm listening." No one taught him that phrase. He was transferred to another school. No further reports were filed. A therapist working in rural West Virginia submitted a voluntary case study to a private medical journal in 2022. The article was never published, but internal peer review notes revealed the details. A 9-year-old girl, began suffering from pre-verbal dissociation episodes, long stretches of alertness without speech, during which she tapped her fingers in a 4-3-2 rhythm. Her drawings included a bell tower surrounded by graves, a hatch with the phrase "quiet must go deeper," a choir of children with empty eyes and no mouths. Her most disturbing sketch was of a wooden box, child-sized, with nails drawn only on one side. Above it, she wrote, "This is the rehearsal chair." Her family had no known ties to Hollowvale, but her great-grandmother had been a student at a Navanished mission school in 1956, Redbridge House, last mentioned in section 9. The resurgence isn't only in dreams and drawings, it's showing up in data. Researchers examining library. Check out logs across rural Appalachian branches found that hand-copied hymnals, many misfiled or anonymously donated, began circulating again in 2015. These hymnals contain no publisher stamp, but all share the same refrain on the final page: Cantari ad lucium, dormire ad pocem. Sing to the light, sleep to the peace. One librarian, Mara Welling, noted that these books tend to be returned wrapped in cloth, with bookmarks placed precisely 22 pages in dot. In a quiet footnote in her journal, she wrote, "It's like they're counting down, page by page, note by note." There are also online leaks. A YouTube video uploaded in 2023 under the title Hollowvale Revisited, found audio, featured what appeared to be a child humming softly over ambient static. The video was only 32 seconds long. The screen remained black, but the waveform, when analyzed, revealed subharmonic layering, a secondary audio signature looping underneath. It spelled out, in sonic code, the phrase 22 in stillness. 21 remain. The video was removed for violating platform policy. The uploader's account was erased, but independent archivists saved the waveform. When played backward, the hum resolves into a recognizable chord progression. D minor, again. The signs aren't only auditory. A woman named Juliana Marks, living in Berea, Kentucky, reported receiving a white ribbon in the mail in early 2024. No return address, no note. Just a single stitch in red thread forming a treble clef. Juliana had no knowledge of Hollowvale, but her grandfather was listed in Hollowvale's unverified 1962 family registry as site carpenter, evening shift. He disappeared in 1965. No remains were found. Juliana's daughter, age 7, began humming in her sleep the night after the ribbon arrived. 3 notes, then silence. 3 notes, then silence. A loop. Perhaps the most chilling proof that the veil is thinning came from a Reddit post, late 2023, titled, "I think my basement was a choir room." The user, posting anonymously, shared photos of a concealed cedar-lined chamber beneath their 1940s farmhouse outside of Manchester, Kentucky. In the room, 22 carved indentations in the walls, exactly child-sized, rusted loops near the base of each indentation. A metal plate on the ceiling engraved with a single phrase, "Return to stillness. Await the conductor." The post received over 1,000 comments. It vanished within 12 hours. Users who commented said their accounts were suspended. One final comment, screen captured before deletion, simply read, "The rehearsal room is no longer sealed. They're listening again." This isn't folklore coming back. It's a ritual resuming. The choir wasn't finished. The hymn wasn't closed. Something about Hollowvale, and the sights like it, was never intended to end. Just pause, like a held breath, waiting for the next note, and the children dreaming now. They weren't there in 1963, but somehow they remember the stillness is leaking through school desks, through bedtime lullabies, through hymns no one taught, through shapes scratched into playground mulch, through GPS static near old foundations, through boxes found in basements that don't match the house's blueprint, through the wind that carries no birdsong, through your child humming in sleep a melody you forgot your grandmother used to sing when no one was around to listen. The veil was only ever temporary. The song continues, and it's choosing voices again. There is a name that keeps returning. It doesn't appear in the same place twice, not always the same spelling. Sometimes just initials, sometimes signed with a flourish like it was proud to be remembered. Other times, barely there, a ghost of a signature on the corner of a ledger, or the final scrawl in a child's homework. But it always comes back. Halbrook, Father J. Ezra Halbrook. Conductor Halbrook, JEH, just hell in one case. The voice that started the rehearsal, and every time the name appears, it's as if the record changes around it, like a script being rewritten in real time to accommodate the character. It was built to serve in the 1961 telegram that closed Hollow Vale's books. The name is printed plainly. The rehearsal is concluded. The site may be returned to soil. No further inspection required, JEH. But go back 10 years earlier, and it appears again. A 1951 application for a religious use permit in Laurel County includes a statement from Reverend Ezra H. Brooke, requesting exemption for a missionary music immersion program. The application was approved. No building was ever listed under the permit. But 3 years later, a school 2 towns over burned, and 6 children went missing. No connection was drawn at the time, until someone looked at the handwriting. The signature on the permit matched the Hollow Vale registry, stroke for stroke, in a 1938 legal deposition regarding Laurel Ridge School. A mysterious figure named E. Halbrook appears as a spiritual advisor, cited in a dispute over the church's control of student housing. The case was dismissed when the witness disappeared before trial. In 1971, a different Halbrook, this time Jonathan E. Halbrook, was listed as the founding bishop of a spiritual education trust that operated briefly in Tennessee before collapsing under investigation for hymnal indoctrination. No charges were filed, but children went missing there. To dot, you begin to notice the handwriting first. It's careful, elongated. The E always curls to the left. The H slants down like it's falling asleep. It's been verified by 3 forensic analysts across 7 documents, all decades apart. Same pressure, same spacing, same man, or the same role. Passed between bodies like a vestment. One child's recovered workbook from Hollow Vale refers to Father Hal as the one who taught us how to lie still with our breath. Another, a page from a forgotten diary in Pike County, calls him the listener who waits for the last note. No one remembers seeing him enter a room, but he was always there in a rural cemetery outside Hazard. A stone marker was discovered in 1999 by a groundskeeper digging a new plot. The stone had no name, just a bell carved into it, and beneath the bell, 3 letters, JEHA. Local priest claimed it was just a coincidence. But the stone was removed within a week. No one requested the removal. No one admitted to taking it. The hole was left unfilled, and every shovel of dirt tossed into it reportedly echoed. Even modern files seem to bend around the name. A FOIA request submitted in 2008 for all records referencing J.E. Halbrook in relation to religious boarding programs. 1950 to 1970 was returned with a simple response. File scope exceeded. Please refine query. 14,452 entries found. 14,000. Across how many counties? How many schools? How many children? One psychologist in 2012 attempted to trace all known references to Halbrook across religious institutions in Appalachia. She was able to confirm 42 unique entries in official registries. Then her database began to rewrite itself. Entries she hadn't touched began duplicating. Halbrook appeared in older files earlier than she'd recorded, and some entries she'd never seen before populated her search list with timestamps from the 1800s. She shut down the project after waking up one morning to find her own name listed as a prior student of Hollowvale. She had never lived in Kentucky. Another anomaly in 2020. A birth certificate was submitted in error to the state's Vital Records Division. The certificate listed the child's name as Hollowvale. Under physician or midwife, one line. Holbrook, no first name, no license number. The hospital said no such person was on staff. The certificate was withdrawn, but the child's mother insisted she heard someone humming in the delivery room. She remembers that after the birth, the lights dimmed. No one spoke, only the humming. Only 3 notes. When asked why she named the child Hollowvale, she said, "I didn't write it, but the paper said I did." This is the danger of the name. It doesn't just appear, it restructures. Every time Halbrook is spoken, something reorganizes the record. A page goes missing. A ledger becomes unreadable. A family photo fades at the corners until the child in it blurs. This isn't a person, not anymore. It's a signature that self-propagates, like a song that writes itself onto the paper when no one's holding the pen. Even the hollow Vale Chapel seems to respond. Several visitors to the site in recent years have reported a peculiar occurrence. When they speak the name Halbrook aloud near the bell tower, they hear a creak behind them, not the wind, not the trees, a door shifting, or wood adjusting itself to a tension. One visitor captured a recording of the event in 22:1 at exactly 7 seconds after speaking the name. A series of knocks can be heard, 22 in total, followed by a long exhale, as if the building itself knew who was being summoned. In folklore studies, there's a term, namaski. It's the idea that certain stories, rituals, entities, structures aren't complete until you say the name. That the act of naming grants entry, but with Halbrook, the opposite seems to happen. You don't enter anything, it enters you. There's a recovered tape, dated 1984, labeled Session 9, Child Witness. The child, believed to be one of the missing from a nearby community school, was asked if she knew who Halbrook was. She whispered, "He's the last word of the song. If you say it, the ending starts." She was never interviewed again. Her file ends with a single line, transferred to choir status. No further notes. And that's the horror, that somewhere beneath the schools, the chapels, the erased buildings and boarded rooms, Halbrook waits, not to teach, not to preach, but to finish what began with a hum and ends with silence, to gather the 22 voices to close the score, to ring the final bell. You can try to forget. Many have, but the name remains. It returns in dreams, etched into childhood desks, scrawled into church ledgers, whispered on tapes, wrapped into lullabies sung by children who don't know what they're remembering. Speak the name and the story. Rewrites itself. Try to erase it, and it will etch deeper, like a conductor waiting with baton raised, not to begin, but to end. In January of 2022, an envelope with no return address was left in the mailbox of the Clay County Historical Society. No postage, no name, just a single word handwritten on the front in graphite soft cursive, listen. Inside were 7 items. A fragment of what looked like hymnal paper, water-stained and brittle at the corners. A photograph of a school hallway, empty, faded, dated October 13th, 1963. A brass button with the initials HVS. A cassette tape labeled 22, Hollow Vale, Session 0. A folded page torn from a school attendance book. A Polaroid of a bell. And a child's drawing. On the back of the drawing, the only place words were written, were 4 names. One matched a girl listed in the 1991 audit. One matched a name that had appeared on a Hollow Vale PTA flyer from 1962. The other 2 have no known records anywhere in the state database. No birth certificates, no census traces, no digital footprint, but the handwriting matches a teacher's file pulled from the burnt foundation of the school. The page is signed at the bottom, faintly and again. Unmistakably, J.E. Halbrook. Here's the question. Researchers keep asking, the one that haunts us more than any single file or disappearance. How do you lose 22 children and no one notices? How do 22 families fall silent? How does a town, already so fragile, allow the cornerstone of its community, a church-run school, to vanish from the map, from the memory, from the mouths of those who once taught inside it? Unless something deeper was taken. Not just children, not just voices, but the permission to remember, in a sealed 1986 deposition, never published publicly but referenced in a wrongful death appeal. A former state investigator who reviewed the Hollow Vale case spoke off record. We were told to treat it as an error in the school system, a filing mistake, but it wasn't. The records weren't just gone, they were replaced. New names, new numbers. You'd open a page and it'd be clean, like no one had ever lived there. But you felt them, like the air still knew their breath. And breath is what it always comes back to, isn't it? The breath the children were trained to still. The breath behind the hymns. The breath caught in the throat of a mother who can't explain why her boy's room still feels warm decades later. Even though the furnace died in '64, one local legend, the kind you don't find in books, just in hushed voices on front porches, says the Hollow Vale children didn't scream when they were taken. They sang something that wasn't written, something that didn't belong to a melody, but to the absence of one, a silent song, a rehearsal for silence, and what remains, a chapel without a congregation, a school without a foundation, a list of names that never stays complete. You can try to catalogue it. We have, but there's always a new discrepancy, a date that doesn't match, a signature that reappears. A girl who shows up in a school photo, eyes fixed straight ahead, and yet whose birth and death are never recorded. And behind all of it, that bell tower, still standing, still ringing sometimes when no one's near it. One researcher claims to have captured a spectrogram of its chime. When converted into wave patterns and visualized through software, the bell didn't produce a curve or a spike. It produced a name 3 times. All the same, Halbrook, Halbrook, Halbrook. At some point we have to ask, were the children ever gone? Or are they still inside the silence? Still standing in the old gymnasium, blindfolded and humming, waiting for the next lesson to begin. In 2018, a high school sophomore in Breathitt County uploaded a TikTok of her baby cousin walking into a closet, holding a candle and repeating something under her breath. The audio went viral. Viewers slowed it down, enhanced it, filtered it. It wasn't a child's mumbling. It was a rehearsal warm-up. Breathe. The same phrasing that appeared in a 1960 teacher's manual for the Hollow Vale Missionary School. A manual no school in Kentucky ever claimed to issue. The caption under the video read, "She says her other school taught her this." The girl was 5. She had never been to school. We spoke with a retired faculty administrator who, in her words, only ever heard of Hollow Vale in church whispers. She told us, there are places the state let vanish, because it was easier, because sometimes what's lost is meant to be lost. But then she leaned in, quiet, shaken. But if they come back, if those children ever come back, it won't be like we remember them. It won't be children anymore. It'll be the silence between songs, and it'll want to be heard. Even now, emails appear in our inbox. People writing with stories of bells in the night, of dreams with nameless teachers, of photographs where, upon closer inspection, a shadow in the window seems to wear a school uniform long out of fashion. We archive them. We compare them, and the pattern continues. The names return, the breath stills, and the chapel bell, that forgotten steeple shadowed by trees. No cartographer ever mapped, never rusts. There's one final page we haven't shown until now. It arrived with no date, typed, not handwritten. No letterhead, when all 22 are remembered, and only then the sound will cease. Until that time, keep the pews closed, the bell unwound, and the books unscored. The rehearsal never ended. Only the audience forgot. There is no signature. But the font matches 3 previous letters, and the watermark is a church seal no diocese claims. We've checked dot everywhere, and so we end here. For now, not with resolution, not with justice, but with the unbearable weight of absence. A school that devoured its roll book, a church that never asked forgiveness, and 22 names that rewrite the story every time they're remembered or forgotten again.